And I'm going to do mine like that so that it's out of the way from everybody. Okay.
Perfect. Nancy, you are good to go.
All right. So welcome, everybody. I'm Nancy Steele. And a little tiny bit of background about me is I was a teacher of the deaf and hard of hearing in Kentucky for 17 years. And along that journey, I got into deaf blindness. So that was how I happened into this field. Then I took a job with the National Center on Deafblindness, and I was there for almost 15 years. And about the last 4 years, I've been just an educational consultant doing all kinds of fun stuff. And today we're going to talk about the communication matrix, which is one of the favorite things I've done in the last few years. And so I want to share a little bit of what we've been doing. So I want to give a special shout out to my friends in West Virginia, because what we've been doing is we saw a critical need. About 4 years ago, I went to West Virginia and did a training on communication. There we go. Woo, eventually I'll get it out. And part of that communication training involves some follow-up, and one piece of that was about the communication matrix. Well, there was supposed to be a module about the communication matrix that I could use in that follow-up. Well, when we got the communication matrix module, it had nothing to do with what we really needed it to do. So my friends Leanne Brammer and Karen Haynes, Annette Carey, and Ruth Ann King all got together with me, and we decided, wow, there's a real critical need. We know that a lot of people will use the communication matrix, but they use it more as a progress monitoring tool. And we saw it as much more that you could use and really help people to understand those early parts of communication. So for the last 3 years, we've been meeting virtually. Now we're meeting once a week virtually to finish this up. But what we did was we developed a framework just to talk about what we felt like was really important parts of communication and that early development of communication. And then from there, we took each one of the 7 levels of the matrix, and we are in the process of just going through what do you need, what happens in each level, and what are the intervention strategies that need to be involved in order to get kids to move forward, or individuals, because for us, it's not just kids. We're also looking at EI, anybody who has any problem with that early development of communication. We feel like what we're developing is going to help those that are working alongside these individuals and move them forward. So what you're going to see today is it's not a finished product yet, so we don't have all the pictures and videos. We have all the content ready, and now we're kind of going back through slide by slide and adding pictures and adding video clips to also enhance it. But we're also writing some notes because Karen Haynes is a recently retired professor, SLP professor from West Virginia University, and she's going to kind of facilitate each one of these presentations for each of the levels in the framework. So all of those 4 and I don't think they'll mind too much. We're all in our 60s, and we just feel like we have a lot of experience in very diverse. 3 of us are teachers, 2 of us are SLPs, and we've learned so much from each other through this, because as we've really, it's become very apparent to us that SLPs and teachers don't always talk the same language. So we're trying to get this content together and make it so that teachers, related service providers, parents, anyone can look at these materials and have these intervention strategies. The way we'd love to see this work happen is that teams would do a communication matrix around an individual. Then they go in and we would ask that they would look at the framework, and then whatever level they felt like their individual was functioning, wherever their individual was functioning, that's the level that they would go to for intervention strategies and what to do. We also incorporated a lot of other things in it, so I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through. Okay, so some of the things that we need to remember just to kick us off is the matrix is designed to document expressive communication for anyone who's functioning in those early communication stages. So it's expressive communication, right? That's what it's measuring. And it's a really excellent tool for individuals with sensory issues. That's one of the reasons why the deaf-blind world, we love the matrix, because it really helps our kids. But then there's also individuals with motor issues, intellectual impairments. So it's good for all folks that are in those lower levels of developing communication. It's also very age appropriate for anyone. It doesn't matter. And what we're thinking is, with our tool that we're kind of developing, early intervention providers could use this tool. So school age, it's good for school age population, and as well as adult services in group homes, having individuals who really understand what they could do in a group home setting or an adult service setting. And then we also really feel like the team approach is key to success, and that families are very much a vital part of that team. What we do know is, so many times when we have these huge teams and everybody's working with kids, then what happens is I come in as the teacher of the deaf and I'm going to do it a certain way. Then the TVI is going to come in and they're going to do their things and talk a different way, or maybe use different key signs or use them in a slightly different way. The family may do it a different way. So if we coordinate those efforts so that everybody's using the same signs, or really understanding when the child does this, it means, so that it's coordinating those efforts is very vital in order to move individuals along the continuum. So 2 things we also need to remember is there's receptive communication, which is the process of receiving information, communication. It's receiving that and understanding a message. And then expressive is how the individual sends a message to a partner. And sometimes those 2 things are different for individuals. So if we look at this picture, this young man down here, he's got his teacher who's giving him a math quiz, and she's using tactile sign to sign the question to him. And then he's using a brailler to express the information. So see, he's got to know how to understand tactually what she's signing, but then he's also got to understand symbolic communication in order to give out his answers. So a lot of times we will have individuals that may receive one way, but express a totally different way. And that's the piece we really have to keep in mind. The other thing we have to keep in mind is, in order for kids to ever, or people to ever get expressive communication going, they've got to receive that information first. And that's a piece that we've got to pump in. You think about typically developing kids and how we talk to them from the time they're born until they ever utter their first word. They've received all this information. So what we've done in our tool that we're developing is to really put in that receptive piece. Okay, so I just said that about receptive, and it precedes the expressive communication. And it's important to use various strategies. So sometimes we may use touch cues, we may use object cues, we may use signs, we may use a combination of all of those to enhance that receptive language skills, which will help then increase the expressive. We also need to think about the sensory. We want you to know that sensory is defined as any sense the individual uses to access information. So it's important for us to know, what is the vision? What is the hearing? How do they use their tactile senses? How do they feel about, how are they doing with their vestibular? Are they able to sit up in a chair in order to receive, or are they better if they lie down when they get that? What's their proprioception like? You know, how are they using these senses, or are they using any of these senses? And we're going to know, if we know those things, then that's kind of our pathway into how we work with them. And those intervention strategies are designed to support the intervention at their current level, as well as in those future target goals. And then goals are targeted for communication skills today, and also we're looking at tomorrow. So we always have to look down the road. Whoops, I think I went one too far. Okay, so if we think about, and when we use the matrix, it's all about looking at behavior, right? So we have to think about some myths about behavior and communication. And these are all commonly heard statements around the individual and communication. And what really is what is the individual trying to say with this? You know, when we say he only communicates through mom, you know, what does that tell you? She's not motivated to communicate. You know, what does that tell you about, I would say, probably more the receiver of the information than the child that's actually, they think, is not motivated to communicate. He only communicates to get his way. Well, duh, don't we all? I mean, we have to think about it in those ways. But a lot of times we don't necessarily look at behavior as communication. And so we have to start really teasing some of these things out to figure it out. So we know that in our world, behavior is communication. And the targeted behavior has to be as easy for the individual as the negative behavior. So we have to help shape that. When it's a negative behavior, we're really having to help shape those behaviors to make it so that more people can understand. And that response to that communication, especially in these early attempts, it has to be immediate. We really have to stop and be ready to help them immediately. That means we have to be paying attention. Did I hear, Jen, do you need me? I guess not. Okay.
Nope, we are good.
Okay, I didn't know if you were going to stop me to ask a question or something in the chat, but okay, we're good. Okay, the communication behaviors, communicative behaviors increase and are successful as when we do it right, then the negative behaviors start fading, because they're getting more from that positive attempt, and they really know what when they do something that we're going to be responsive, and we're going to know what that means, and they're going to get what they want. So those negative behaviors will start to fade away. But if we do have a child that has challenging behaviors and they're self-injurious, we really must look at assessing that and getting a functional behavior analysis going if the child is injuring themselves. But behavior can have many communicative intents. What is he really trying to say to us? It's not always easy to determine those things. And sometimes there could be other things going on that we're not aware of. And throughout these levels, whether during an assessment or an intervention, teams have to maintain that critical eye on behavior of the individual and looking for communication strategies. We're always going to be looking at that, especially as we get it going and momentum going with it. Okay, so I'm going to do a real quick, just the components of the matrix, talk about those, because what I really want to do is spend most of my time today and on Thursday talking about each of the levels and intervention strategies that go with them, because I know that that's what we all want and need. So components of the matrix. We have the matrix involves 4 major aspects of communication. There are 4 of the earliest reasons for communicating, and they pare them down into 7 levels of communication. And there are 24 specific messages that someone expresses, such as, I want that. And there are 9 categories of behaviors that someone uses to communicate, such as simple gestures. So the 4 aspects are captured in skills rated from not used to surpassed. Okay, so the 4 reasons that are early in what we would use to communicate are to refuse things we don't want, to obtain things we want to do, to engage in social interaction, or to seek and provide information. And if you have the profile, it's down on the bottom. And see, you'll see it, like here's a profile of a child, and then here are the things that are down at the bottom. And so you can see on the refuse in the categories in the all levels, refuse and obtain and social are on all levels, but then seeking information starts at level 4. So we don't even measure it before level 4. On this particular one, we have a lot mastered in 1 and 2. You see that there are 2 ones that are white that are just not used. And I don't know that I would go back and try to work on those. They're just things that are not used in Dave's profile. He just doesn't use those. But as you can see in level 3, he's got several things that he's mastered, the orange, but then he's got several emerging things that are coming out. He's really starting to get intentionality, and he's really moving into some more conventional communication. So the team would decide what things they want to target, which things they feel, and that would be very individualized depending on the team, depending on the child, the circumstances, so it depends on that. Then we have the different levels, and with the different levels, can't be determined solely on the assessment itself. Individuals' abilities, histories, and diagnoses factor into determining the appropriate level for intervention. So we wouldn't necessarily just say, oh, like on the one that I just showed you, oh, he's straight up level 3, we need to stay there. I would maybe look at things on level 3 and 4, because all of those things are emerging and starting to go. So I would think about what kind of intervention strategies I might use. Okay, so on Hannah's here, she's surpassed level 1, and she's done pretty well with level 2. She's starting into level 3, and she's got some things that she's mastered and some things that just aren't even used yet. So I would still think that she would probably be working on some intentionality and getting to intentional communication, that I do have a partner and I do want things from that partner. But we'll talk about that in a little while. There are 24 specific messages, and as you can see, they're kind of sprinkled throughout the different levels. You see the levels on the left over here, but then over across the settings of which different things we would be targeting, which specific messages at which levels would be appropriate. And these are the 9 categories of behavior that would be used. So the body movements and early sounds, those are the things that happen in early stages of development. Then we may bring in those facial expression. They may do the visual a little bit later. So all of these, they're not going to use all of these at one time. These also, these categories, these behaviors may be used as the learner gets more equipped to give more communication. Okay, and then these are the components, the skills. So it's either surpassed, and we don't even have to look at that, but they've already surpassed all of that. Things that are mastered are in orange. Sorry about that. The emerging skills are in yellow, and those should be practiced daily. We really need to really spotlight and with the mastered things, I'd even go back and you should expand those more, maybe have more partners, or maybe in across environments, more environments. Just because it says it's mastered doesn't mean that it's mastered all across always. So we always want to kind of go back and spot check and make sure. But then those emerging skills we need to practice daily. And then not used skills should be introduced maybe by using those the emerging and mastered skills. The focus of the communication plan should solidify those mastered skills and expand on those emerging skills and introduce the skills that are not yet used. So who should complete the communication matrix? And are multiple perspectives needed? Well, actually, the family very much should be a part of this, because think about your own self. Where are you most comfortable and your total self? You're at home around your family. They're going to have the most messages. They're going to know the most about the child because they've been around them the most, or the individual. So it's really pretty essential that you get the family involved in this. You can do it with the school team, but you're not necessarily going to get the whole picture if you just have 1 or 2 people do it. If that's all you can have that fill out and complete the assessment, then that's okay. But those should be people that really understand and know the individual. You're not going to do very well if you don't know the individual yourself that much. It's not unusual to have differences in results when various individuals complete the matrix separately, because if you think about it, we're different people around different situations. Like I am going to be different in this venue with you all, more so than I am if I'm going to be around my family at a picnic or with my girlfriends out on a Saturday night. So we all act differently in different situations, and our students are going to be the same way. Our individuals are going to be the same way. So this observable behavior is subject to interpretation. So my interpretation of a behavior may be different from somebody else's, and so on. So that's where, if you're doing it together, you really have kind of a discussion about that as you're going through. And emerging for one person may be mastered by another. So there's all of that controversy too. So, and relationships really influence behavior. So if the child has an intervener and they're very close, then that relationship, they're going to see a lot more of the behaviors, the communicative behaviors, and than say somebody who only sees the individual once a month. There's such a difference. And then motivation also impacts communicative attempts or intent, I'm sorry. So when we use the profile, we want to use it as a guide. The completed matrix becomes that profile which guides intervention. It kind of tells us and pinpoints how they're communicating and assist in identifying some logical goals. So we have to be flexible about that. Those skills are marked as mastered, may need to be revisited. And I'm thinking, especially now with COVID, we have a lot of kids that have been out for a long time and they're coming back into schools. And as they come back into schools, we're going to see a difference. They may have not used as many of their skills as they had before we left before COVID. So, and also, you know, a lot of individuals have gone through a lot of stress and they haven't necessarily understood why. Why is my whole family stressed out? They haven't understood COVID on the levels that the rest of us kind of have. But even thinking about your own self and how COVID has, and the lockdown of everything has, and the stress that is increased in everybody's lives, in your own personal lives. And then you think about these individuals who don't have communication and don't really have a way for people to fully just let them know what's going on and why people are stressed out around them and why everybody's feeling that stress. So I think that this is going to be very timely to kind of revisit and look at some of these things that were maybe mastered before, may not be so much. But a lot of that is going to really revolve around getting some good trusting relationships going. We're going to follow that individual's lead. And we also need to collect that data and adjust intervention frequently, because as we know, as they move up or down or whatever, that data is going to help drive what decisions we make and how we do our intervention. So really what we'd like to see happen is, here's the communication matrix profile, but then there's a communication plan that's kind of developed out of that, that just works hand in hand. You know, the communication plan is that flexible guide the team uses to apply the analyzed data to determine that specific daily interventions for achieving the IEP or IFSP goals. And then you have those measurable goals that are the annual or short-term objectives to meet those needs. And then hopefully, if we get all of these things going, then we're going to, on the other end of it, we're going to have a competent communicator. That's somebody who really has maximized all of their communication skills. And that really is our ultimate goal for our kids, right? Okay, so when we think about our intervention considerations, you really, really have to start with considering the impact of any sensory systems or lack of experiences that may prevent an individual from understanding, and the impact of incidental learning. And that incidental learning piece is so huge, especially for our learners with deaf blindness, because that incidental learning is just that. It's that stuff that we've seen. No one sat down and taught us. We sweep our eyes and we've watched other people play. So that's how we learned how to play. We watched other people not do things, our siblings not do things. So we didn't do those things because we knew if they're not doing it, there must be a reason I didn't do it. I was 4th out of 5. So of course I learned that pretty easily. But that incidental learning piece is missing for our kids with deaf blindness, especially if they don't have the vision, because if they haven't seen these things, then they don't know how it works. And so we really have to understand their sensory systems and how much they see, how they see, what they hear, how they hear. And then those interventions must take into account the gross and fine motor, the vocal and sensory abilities, and any limitations that may make it difficult to produce certain behaviors. So sometimes a child, if they're very motorically impaired, they're not going to be able to point at something, or maybe they're not going to be able to move their head to look at something. So we have to stop and take that into account as we're building this communication plan for them. Okay, so it starts with availability to learn also with our students. And that's something that we take for granted. We don't think about it. Those internal factors and external factors are almost like this picture of trying to find where's Waldo. If we don't understand that those things are going on with these kids, and we're trying to do this communication intervention with them, if we don't know about what's happening with them internally or externally, then it's almost impossible to get them to the next level of communication. And those internal factors are what's happening inside the body and the brain. So that's how they're feeling physically or emotionally. Maybe they're scared. Maybe they've never been in this kind of situation before, so they don't know, and they're frightened, and they're not necessarily going to let you know that. Maybe he's in pain. Maybe the medications that he's taking are affecting him. How much sleep has she had? And what influences her, all of her different abilities? And how does he have any difficulties with sensory processing or sensory integration? Those are those internal factors that we don't necessarily know, but we've got to be on the lookout and always thinking about, because these may very much impact our intervention and how we're going to proceed forward with kids. The external factors, what's happening outside the individual that may positively or negatively influence communication. And as you can see, here's a really, really busy classroom. And sometimes our classrooms, while we love to decorate and make them pretty and stuff, sometimes it can cause kids to just shut down because there's too much. Or they can't focus because all of the things, the lighting, or sometimes that background noise, the pencil sharpener, kids moving around, desk, books slamming, smells can cause problems, movement, any kind of tactile input. Sometimes when there are lots of people around, or lots of just the physical supports, positioning is a huge piece. If a child is not positioned in the correct way, or sometimes if they've been in one position way too long, then they're not able to necessarily tell you, I've been in this wheelchair now for 3 hours, and if I don't move my hips, I'm going to be hurting. And it really, I can't focus on what you're doing and how you're doing that. Also, just clutter, just physical, visual, tactile clutter, all of those things. There's all kinds of, and I'm looking at my desk and all around, and right now I need to do that. My external factors are going to have an influence on my work if I don't clean my desk off. So what it really boils down to is we've designed kind of this work that we really want to think about when we are going up the matrix and all these different levels. We need to be thinking about constantly about receptive communication. We want to always be thinking about concept development. And I'll get to concept development in a few minutes. And then literacy. Literacy develops at the same time as communication. They go hand in hand. They dovetail each other beautifully. So we have added that receptive communication piece. We've talked about the concept development piece throughout this work, and the literacy piece throughout this work. But it all stems from a foundation, building a foundation for communication. And that foundation starts with trusting relationships, consistency of partners, individuals' interests, a supportive and responsive environment, and also routines. If you have those things as your foundation for communication, then as you're working through some of these strategies, you're thinking about what receptive communication do I need to input in order to get the expressive outputted, and what kind of concepts are we developing along the same time? And then how does that mesh in with the literacy work? Then when we think about that, that only helps us increase and move things to the next level for individuals when it comes to their communication and moving them along the continuum. Okay, so this also goes with several other studies that have been done and such. Dowden in 1999, these are the stages of communication independence. And if you look at the characteristics of he did it as emerging communication, context dependent communication, and independent communication. Well, if you look at the bottom here, we have the levels 1, 2, 3, or 4 are in emerging communication. Then when we get to that context dependent communication, where we're getting more into symbolic communication methods, and communication has particular context or partners, or maybe we're starting to, vocabulary is chosen through the AAC strategies. That's all like level 5 and 6 stuff. See, we've got to start with those levels 1 through 4, with those early things before we ever introduce some of those other symbolic. I see a lot of folks that, right off the bat, they start with some switches with kids, and some kids are just not ready for it. I've worked with several kids. I've been asked a lot of times. I go in and I see kids, and I'm asked to, kind of work with the kids and just kind of try to get interactions going and see what's going on. So when I do that, a lot of times I'll put toys to the side, especially with the level 1, 2, and 3 kids. I will put toys and things aside and just make it a turn taking and things to play between the two of us, because that intimate one-on-one, letting them know I'm here, I'm listening. And sometimes it's I'm listening with my hands. I'm right there beside you. I'm a willing communication partner. I want to know what you have to say. And sometimes if we don't think of it in those terms and we don't change things up, we're always putting things, toys in front of kids. But remember that incidental learning piece, and they haven't gotten there yet. So they don't even know what to do. And what they do with it is they get that toy and they throw it behind them or throw it to the side. They toss it because they don't know how to play with it. They don't know how to interact. We learn that by watching others play with those toys and interact with those toys. So that caused us to come over and try it ourselves. If our kids haven't had the vision and stuff, they're not going to. So a lot of times I'll start out with these early level kids. I will only use my body and their body and do some turn taking, some playing, some songs, and some tapping and clapping and that kind of thing, because those are the things that get us back and forth flow. That's the very basis of communication, right? That back and forth turn taking interactions. And then when we get to the independent communication, where they're starting to put those two words together and beyond, then we're at level 7 and then on, and communication matrix is not the tool that you use anymore. And you're going more to more traditional tools and such. Okay, so some of the intervention considerations. We need to determine which specific communication behaviors to target. So when after the profile is done and you're looking and there's all these different things, so you want to think about, we can't address all of these. What do we want as a team? Maybe we're going to target only one existing behavior, or maybe we're going to strive for new ones. That's a team decision. That's a team really sitting down and thinking about the situation, thinking about the individual, and deciding exactly what they want to target. And it should be the team that's targeting, so that everybody on the team, and that's the OT and the PT who only come once a month, they too should be part of this, because they need to be using those same intervention strategies, and they need to know what those different behaviors mean as well. Then we're going to refer to the profile to determine where there are gaps in those communication skills. What are we going to do? And where are those gaps? And how are we going to address those gaps? And then we're going to target new messages that are important to the individual, not what we want to hear. We want to know what is important to them. You know, we know what's important to us, but that's not necessarily important to the individual. And we have to, if we're going to move them forward, it has to be important to them first. It really does take a village in order to get this done. Sorry. For typical individuals, learning to communicate occurs naturally, and it's learned incidentally. No one sat down and taught you how to communicate. They really didn't. You learn from others. You learn from listening to others, from trying different things. For your individual, it didn't occur. So we have to engineer that environment and the stimuli around him in order to make this work. We have to get everybody involved, speech paths, teachers, paraprofessionals, family members, peers, anybody they come in contact with on a regular basis. We need to get them involved. We also need to determine the roles and the responsibilities of everybody on the team. So who's going to collect data and who's going to analyze the data? And how will it be collected? And who's going to guide the team? Is it going to be the teacher that guides this? Is it going to be the SLP? Is it going to be a combination? All of those things need to be determined in order to move it forward. And that's all very individualized depending on the team. We have to remember that communication is an exchange. That successful interaction requires consistent response from each individual's behavior in a predictable way. And communication partners' body language and verbal tone and touch and convey a message. So if I'm sitting here like this with the individual and I'm not really using a lot of verbal tone, or I'm not very leaning forward, my hands out, I'm ready, I'm a willing conversationalist with you, all of those things send a message. And if I'm not that way, if I'm more like this, or I look like, oh, I don't know what to do, that sends a strong message to that individual. And we have to remember that what we're doing sends a message. Then the individual's attention and motivation on a shared topic. I've had shared topics that have been so bizarre, but so effective. One of my students used to have a cookie sheet that she'd sit and flip and balance. And that was what she loved. She could spend hours with this cookie sheet, because I knew her background, which was she spent the first 2 years of her life in a hospital bed with metal around her. And she was deafblind. Metal is her friend. She stayed there in that little bed forever. And she loved the feel of metal. She put her mouth up next to the metal. So therefore, that cookie sheet was metal. It was cold. And she really, that for some reason was very calming for her. So we have to, sometimes we share that topic. So I will listen and watch what they're doing, whatever that behavior is. And then I want to talk about it. I want to try to do it too, because then it's one of those things that we can have a conversation about. Maybe I'll try it, and then it's my turn to do the cookie sheet. Then I'm going to give it back. And she's going to do it one way, then I'll do it maybe another way. And pretty soon we've got this ongoing thing, this turn-taking interaction that's going on that turns into kind of a communication conversation where we really have had a wonderful time just exploring this cookie sheet together or whatever that thing is. Individuals are going to demonstrate different skills with familiar and unfamiliar partners and environments. So when they're familiar, they're going to know those things and they're going to relax with it. If it's unfamiliar, they may not. Once again, I'm asked a lot of times to go in and interact with kids that I don't know and they don't know me. But I've known since over the years that I have to make myself available and be open for them and them to recognize that openness with me. And most of those kids that I have interacted with have done that. It's because I have been open and been a willing partner. Putting it into practice. Once the individual has words or behaviors or symbols or whatever it is that we're starting to develop for them, then they should own them. So in other words, if they have those things, we have to strive for them having it 24/7 access. Just like we don't take our voice boxes out and leave them at school every day. We shouldn't leave their AAC devices there. Back and forth, it needs to go with them wherever they are. That consistency in interpreting communication needs to happen across all environments. Everybody needs to understand those things. That's why we document it and make sure that everybody has copies of it and knows what it is and what those things mean. This does take commitment and effort, but it's so worth it. It also takes collaboration between the team members and including the family. So if I have documentation of what all the different intents, the different behaviors that my student uses at school, I'm going to share that at home and I'm going to ask them, do they use those same things when they're asking for things at home, or do they use different things? And what are some other things that they use at home that we don't necessarily know about at school? And we want to capture and try to make that happen so that the student knows it's happening everywhere and everybody knows. Another big pet peeve is check those batteries and charge those devices. If the child has hearing aids, if their batteries aren't working, it's not going to work. So we got to make sure that we do all of those things. And then those words should never be left on the shelf or out of reach. We always want to make sure that they have access to be able to say what they want to say or do what they want to do with their words. And we always want to start expanding that vocabulary. We want to embed it throughout the school day. I've run up against folks who really, oh no, we don't want to bombard, so we're only going to introduce 2 vocabulary words. That's it. We don't want to go any further. And I kind of feel like, if I only had to pick 2 words for everything, what's that going to be? Wow, that's really limiting. But if I really think about embedding communication to where whatever it is that we're doing and embedding the communication within that routine or that activity, then I think that context is going to kick in and they're going to understand it a whole lot more and be able to go with it a whole lot longer and a whole lot more if we embed throughout the day. And then that school-home partnership, the greater and the stronger it is, the more we are going to have success if everybody's on the same page. And that's not always possible, but that's, of course, what we're striving to do. So let's think about the team's responsibility. And when we thought about this work, we really looked at 3 critical components for effective communication, and that's partners, the individual, and the environment. So we put these balls on our stuff that really say, this is what the partner should do, this is what the individual should do, and this is what we should expect from the environment. So one of the things that needs to happen is data, the foundational data to determine those goals for the communication plan. And the team should determine the data collection system, and that data must be collected by the team and shared among the team members, because that's going to make it, yes, I'm seeing that. Are you seeing it when you having? Are you seeing it? Oh, you're not? Oh, well, I wonder what the difference is. So collecting that data is going to be really vital. And it doesn't have to be anything that's long and drawn out. This is just a sample. What are the opportunities that our student has even had to communicate? And how many partners? So we can look throughout the day and just tally. And then when we start looking at it and going, oh, wow, we really didn't give him any opportunities to communicate. Well, if we don't give them opportunities, then guess what? He's not going to be having a whole lot of time where he's going to be successful, because we haven't given him time to practice it. So sometimes it's just a matter of collecting this kind of data just to see if we are giving opportunities, and if there are multiple partners, or if there are any partners available at all. So, sometimes just looking at those kind of things makes all the big difference in the world. And like I said, it doesn't have to be long and drawn out. It doesn't have to be very formalized. It's more of, let's look at this. Let's really double check what we're doing to make sure it works for our student. The environment is, we have a responsibility to make the environment ready for our individual. The environment should include opportunities to increase communication partners, including multiple adults and peers. So many times we work with our kids and we're isolated. We individualize them, and they can have multiple people around them, but they're not necessarily communicating with them. And in order for them to really increase their communication attempts, we have to give them opportunities at least every 15 minutes outside of direct intervention. So that takes a little bit of thought on our part of, oh, wow, we're really expecting them to communicate 4 times a day. That's kind of scary. But unfortunately, that happens when we don't think about it. We get so caught up in our own lives. We get so caught up in our own jobs, and we have multiple kids that we're working with, that we're not singling out and really thinking about how many opportunities we're giving kids to use their communication. And if they don't use it and get comfortable with it and make it rote, it's not going to work. So we're going to have to expect the individual to communicate. If we don't expect them to, they're not going to. What we're doing then is teaching them learned helplessness, and that's not what we want to do.
Hey, Nancy.
Yes.
Ooh, that was loud, sorry. There's a question in the chat box.
Okay.
How long should you take sample data for?
It depends on what you're doing and what you're looking at. And you could do that for, I would do it for a week or so, maybe 2 weeks, depending on what it is you're really looking at. If I'm looking at opportunities, I'm probably going to do that for a couple of days, especially if the schedule stays pretty much the same. Then I may do that for a couple of days. That's going to tell me real quickly whether or not there are opportunities are even being given. So I don't need 3 weeks worth of data in order to collect that. If I see after 2 or 3 days, oh, wow, there are lots of holes here, then that's when I need to stop collecting data and start looking at how we're going to do this and what do we need to do, and then how can we measure that. Did that answer that? Yes, no?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay. So communication, it's that partnership and really understanding with each other, not only the team's responsibility to communicate with the individual, but with each other. And sometimes that's hard. And so the things that we need to do is observe and focus. We have to become detectives with these learners, these individuals with minimal communication. We've got to be detectives on and really focus in and really observe. And sometimes in the flow of a classroom and things are going crazy and all this, and you really don't zone in on that kid but 5 times during the day. And I'm making that number up. But those 5 times you need to observe and focus. You have to be in that moment. You have to be attuned to that individual and follow that lead, that individual's lead, their motivation, their interest. So in other words, if I only have this amount of time and I'm that classroom teacher, and I've come around and I'm working with Bob, and I really want to be all about Bob, not all the other things that are going on in the classroom. When I go in to have an intervention or a communication exchange, then I want to do all of those things. I want to make sure that I'm there and they know I'm there. See, sometimes it takes a minute to just gain their attention. And sometimes what we do is we go in and we act on kids, and then we're in and out. We act on them. We don't give them any processing time, and then we're back out. So that whole exchange happens within a minute's time, and the kid never even knows what happened because they weren't ready physically, mentally, emotionally, whatever. And the exchange has already happened, and we're in and out, and they are just now coming to you, and you're gone, up and off. And that happens more frequently than we think. So you really have to, when you're looking at these individuals and you're ready to have some kind of exchange, you as the partner have this responsibility to be there and be ready as a communication behavior or as a communication partner. And you want to shape those behaviors to where they're more communicative. The other thing I see a lot is a lot of more. Let's try more. And we all go for more, and more is and I have to say that more is my pet peeve. More makes me crazy, because what we do is we teach kids more, but then we don't give them more what? And so then the kid learns more for all these different things, everything. Oh, you want more juice, you want more play, you want more swing, you want more whatever we're doing. So we give them this, but we don't give them what. So we need to start giving them more, whatever it is, more of the action, more of the food, so add to more. Please do that, because otherwise then it becomes this wonderful game that they do this and you're jumping around going, oh, well, do you want more of this? Do you want more of this? What is it? What more do you want? And so that's something that we really have to stop and think about. We want to help that individual grow in the direction of conventional and intentional symbolic communication. And we always want to remember that behavior is communication. So now we want to talk about the development of intentionality. And that's a huge piece. Intentionality, once kids learn intentionality, that what they do affects others, and their actions can affect others, then it's a beautiful thing. So let's talk a little bit about intentionality. Intentionality is that deliberate pursuit of a goal as well as the means to attain the goal. So if a child, when we look at those levels, like level 1 kids, they don't have any kind of intentionality. Think newborn. They cry. We come in and we're the ones that talk about that behavior. So intentional behavior really kind of starts coming in at level 2, they really start recognizing the behaviors under their control, but it's not used to communicate intentionally. So they have that behavior and they can control it. Whoa. Somebody's microphone is on.
Got them. We're good.
Great, thanks. Okay, so it's not used to intentionally communicate. Level 3 is when intentionality comes into play, intentional communication. It may be unconventional and it's definitely pre-symbolic, but it's used to intentionally communicate. That could be somebody grabs your hand and they take you over to the refrigerator because they want juice out of the refrigerator. They're grabbing you and using you as a tool to get what they want, but they know what they want, and they know that you are the one that can help them get that. So they're going to intentionally use you as a person to get it. In level 2, the child may just go to the refrigerator themselves and be able to get the stuff out. They know what they want and they're going to get it, but they're not using a communication partner to get that. Okay. So in level 1, it's very pre-intentional, level 1, and transition is level 2. Behavior is not intentional, is intentional, but not intentionally communicative. Then in level 3, that's where it really begins. It's unconventional, but it's pre-symbolic behaviors. In level 4, it starts getting conventional. So that's where you may get the pointing or the gestures or different things like that. Still pre-symbolic though. We're not going to use any of those symbolics, symbols in order to get there. In level 3 and 4, behavior is both intentional and intentionally communicative. The difference between level 3 is those unconventional. So they're going to grab you or they're going to do things like that instead of pointing. They may point to the refrigerator as a level 4 kid instead of taking you over there. They may point or gesture towards the refrigerator to get their juice. So that it's really important to understand those are those differences in the levels. And then in level 1, in this stage, the individual is neither deliberately pursuing a goal nor aware of a means to obtain the goal. The communication partner interprets those behaviors as if it were intentional. If you think about it, oh, baby cries. We go over and get the baby. Oh, you're hungry. You must want something to eat. So we're doing this. We're just talking to them as if whatever they have done, they knew exactly what it was, and we're putting words in their mouth. So that's level 1. And then sometimes those expressive behaviors from level 1 kid may be idiosyncratic. So they may be individualized what they do themselves. It's a behavior state. It may be context driven. So only in the moment of whatever's happening around. The individual starts to learn the power of communication. They're starting to learn just barely that if I cry, somebody might come. But the partner is always interpreting those behaviors. So the receptively at a level 1, they comprehend maybe the speaker's tone of voice or the physical contact or the touch, maybe touch cues, those different things. So receptively, they may be getting those. Expressively, they're doing these other things. When we look at level 2, and intentionality. In this stage, the individual is deliberately engaged in behavior, but doesn't have a mental plan for obtaining that goal. They may engage in that, they may cry, but they don't have a way of they really haven't figured out that you could help them with this. That communication partner may use the context to derive some meaning. The interpretation of unconventional forms will be required in order to do that. So receptively, this is where they're starting to get that intentionality. And it's purposeful communication begins to emerge. They're starting to see their actions could cause people to come running. Their actions can start things to move. I can get what I want, but they're just getting it, but they're not quite there yet. They haven't figured out quite all the pieces of it. And that context helps contribute to some degree. And then receptively, their comprehension of maybe some of the words or some of the directives, but it's always in context, always. Okay, so then when we get to the level 3 and 4, when we're developing the intentionality, an individual uses behaviors for the purpose of affecting another person. So they're going to use their behavior to make others do things, usually for them. Thanks, I'm really thirsty, sorry about that. In this stage, the individual is deliberately pursuing a goal and has a mental plan. So they know what they want and they know how they can get it. And they're going to pursue that and exchange with another person in order to make that happen. The form might still be real unconventional. Like I said, that grabbing and moving another person's body to do something instead of them doing it themselves. Then as far as level 3 and level 4 with expressive, what we might see is that pre-symbolic communication is the foundation for beginning those symbolic communication that will appear in higher levels. And that communication becomes less dependent on the context or the routine. So they may actually think of something that's in the other room and be able to go in and make sure it happens, or they get what they want from somewhere else. It doesn't have to be right there in front of them or happening while they're doing some kind of routine. And receptively, the comprehension precedes the production. So they understand it before they actually can do it. And then comprehension of the words, they may comprehend the words or the signs or the objects or gestures or whatever that's emerging, and that also increases as they're moving through. So we have to really support receptive communication and really think about what we do and how we put that receptive work into them so that they're receiving the signals, receiving the right things, and understanding what it is that they're receiving, so that before we can ever expect them to do it expressively. So that begins with the partner modeling. So I'm going to model the behavior that I want them to do in their preferred mode of communication. I'm always going to model it first. And then I'm also going to use it across all levels, that in multiple forms. I'm going to use as many ways as I can to get my message across to them. So it may be that I use touch cues. I may use object cues. I'm also going to use my voice. I may use sign also to go with it, to encourage and support their understanding, whatever it takes to get them to receive that information and understand, so that it goes into their brain and they can file it in a way that makes them understand it better. And multiple forms support their comprehension. So I'm not going to necessarily bombard them with everything I can possibly think of, but I am going to use that as I'm sending my message. I'm going to use it as in a natural way so that they understand. So much like in a diapering routine, I might use touch cues to let them know. I might touch their belly to let them know I'm going to change your diaper. And then I may also give them just a tab of a diaper or a piece of a diaper to let them know this is what we're going to do. Also going to use my voice. I may not talk full sentences. I might say diaper off, diaper on, those kind of things. I may use only 1 or 2 words. I may diaper on. I may do some signs with it, but I'm also always going to use all of that combination so that they're receiving the information. Am I going to expect them to give me all of those back? Absolutely not. But first, I'm modeling those things so that they understand. Then we're going to just overview the receptive communication development. In level 1, there's just the awareness, reacts to people and may begin to orient toward them. Then there's anticipation, which is level 2. We really want to get kids to anticipation. And that's why it's so important that we do routines with them so that they really understand what's going to happen next. And that may, with that anticipation, they may start orienting towards people and may begin to attend to their communicative behavior. So I may do diaper on and all of those things for a long time and model that, but I'm hoping that then they're going to start attending to what I'm doing. So they might start quieting down. They might actually start touching or tactually exploring when I'm engaged. They may show general anticipation, such as smiling or reaching towards or engaging, or when I touch their tummy, just tell them I'm going to take the diaper off. They may help me. Or when I ask them, let's scoot your bottom up and touch, touch their hip, they may move their body up a little bit. So when level 3, that's when they start attending to others' communication and responds to their specific behaviors and intent. So in levels 3 and 4. So you see how the progress is going. So we have to think about individuals with motor issues, sensory loss, or other disabilities such as autism often need the environment engineered for learning or have the concepts directly taught. Remember that whole incidental learning piece that I was talking about a little while ago, and those things that we learn without anyone ever teaching us. So we really have to stop and think about that. And we as teachers don't think about those things. That's how we develop our concepts. And concept development for typical individual is learned incidentally. We don't have to teach a lot of these concepts. We don't have to build concepts like we do with our learners with motor issues or sensory losses. With them, we really, really do have to think about concepts and think about what it is we're teaching kids and why we're doing it. We have to know that concepts are developed through experiences and through interactions with the environment. That's how we learn. That's how we collect all of that information, and our concepts develop and they grow and become larger because of that. So we're going to talk a little bit about concept development. And why do we even discuss it? It's because they're the underpinning for communication. If we're going to have it, we expect communication, we've got to have the concepts and think about what concepts we are teaching, what concepts they do have already, and what ones they don't have, and how we're going to go about really strengthening those concepts. Concepts provide that framework to support them across all efforts of effective communication. And without that framework or that foundation, they're not going to progress to higher levels of communication because they don't have that framework in order to move forward or to expand. And so we're going to talk a lot about concepts. We do talk a lot about concepts as we go through. So how are they developed? They're developed through our experiences. Now stop and think about the learners that you work with and what their prior experiences have been. And a lot of times when you start thinking about where they've been and what they've been exposed to, or how many people or how few people, then you start thinking about, oh, they haven't developed a lot of concepts because they haven't had too many experiences, or their experiences have been, they didn't start out the same way that a typically developing kid would, where it's very nurturing, very bonding with the parents and all of those things. So many of our kids start out their experience in a NICU, and that's quite a different experience. So their concepts are skewed already just by the lack of nurturing and being able to hold them and experience the bond that you would typically have. It's developed through purposeful engagement. We have to think about these concepts, and we almost have to set the stage in order to make them happen. We also have to give them practice, practice, practice. And that's where those routines come in. That's where we have those routines, we get them where they really understand those routines. Then we vary those routines so that they have exposures to different things that go around. And with each one of those, the concepts develop even further and deeper. And so that's why it's really important that we do that. Okay, so here's a big aha and thing that we don't think about as educators. Once again, what do? We focus on skills. We are all about some skills. We are skill driven, and we want our kids to learn skill. So a skill is the ability to do something, such as tying a shoe, using vision to find an object. We're always measuring things by skills. We think about concepts, it's that mental representation or image or idea of tangible or concrete objects, such as this is a chair I'm sitting in, there's a dog, or as intangible ideas or feelings, colors, emotions, self-concepts, all of those things that we take for granted, but we don't really spend a whole lot of time. Where I'm saying that probably we need to start looking over at concepts if we're going to be successful with kids, because we really need to make those more accessible to them and expose them to more experiences and such so that they can develop it. So for example, we're so good at teaching kids how to do laundry, and we could teach them step by step how to get the clothes, how to sort the clothes, how to put them in the washer, how to put them in the dryer, how to fold them, and how to put them away. But have we ever given them the concept of what are clean clothes versus dirty? How do we even get them to do the laundry in the first place if they have no concept of whether something's clean and dirty? So there's the difference there, is we haven't given a whole lot of thought about that kind of thing and teaching them those things to think about. We're really skill driven. Okay, so concepts, it's important to build those concepts while providing vocabulary for individuals. And concepts are how we connect meaning to objects and events and people. They provide that foundation for communication and literacy. And they provide the framework for individuals to organize their information and thoughts. And so we look at the vocabulary and we think about how we're going to group those tangible symbols into conceptual categories. So we really have to stop and think about how can we make those concepts pop and build those concepts so that they have deeper meaning. And I'm going into just, this is as far as I'm getting with concepts. When we get into our stuff that our tool that we're developing, we go into concepts a whole lot deeper than what I'm going to today, but I know that we're kind of running out of time today. So the complexity of concepts, we have concrete concepts, which we're usually pretty good at teaching. We relate to objects or things that are tangible or can be seen, touched, held, smelled, heard, so we can teach them cold or dry or wet, loud, soft. We can teach body parts, big and little, all those kind of things. Those are things that we can concretely teach because they can be seen, we can touch them, they can be held. We can, those we're pretty good at. Then there are those semi-concrete concepts, and those relate to any kind of action that we do, or it may be colors or positioning or something that can be demonstrated but not necessarily held in one's hand. So to jump or in front of or behind, or red or blue or yellow or night and day. Those are things that we can kind of, they're there, but they're kind of hard for us. We can do it, we can demonstrate it, but it's here and we can't keep it. We can't hold it. So jumping, I can jump and I can show you jumping, but I have to do it multiple times in order for them to really understand that. Then those abstract feelings, which are just as equally important, are things that we really have a tough time with. And that's feelings, emotions, different qualities and ideas. So honesty and patriotism and those kind of things. But the other things that we never think about are self-concepts. Just those, and especially our learners who are blind or visually impaired, and just that sense of self and what do I look like? And I have these body parts, and how come my look different than yours, and that kind of thing. So just those awareness of self is equally important, and also those feelings of like compassion and thoughts towards others, and those kind of things are very, very hard to teach. But unfortunately, with our population, a lot of times we do have to physically teach those things, and it can be really hard to do. Then literacy and the matrix, just they go hand in hand. Communication, language, and literacy are all connected. They all happen at the same time. They work just they develop at the same time, and individuals need targeted intervention for that expressive communication development, and also need those targeted interventions for developing literacy. So we've tried to add, with each level, we've put a literacy piece with each one. And so we want you to know that that is coming. So it's not necessarily, I'm not going to necessarily do a whole lot of talking about that kind of stuff in today and Thursday, but we do have that because I feel like it's really important that we connect those pieces. So this is probably going to be where I stop, because we've got 4 minutes until we're done. But this is just giving you kind of an idea of what happens at each level in terms of, and we can't even see all this stuff, can we, at the top? The communication levels, and then what are the different vocal or speech things? What are the different body movements or stuff like that? This is the different technology that might be used at different levels. See, at level 1, we wouldn't even do it. Possibly even level 2, we wouldn't necessarily do that. Then starting at level 2, we may only do a calling device. But we are, and then 2 and 3 dimensional symbols, we wouldn't even start until like level 4 or level 5, actually, because we need to sequentially make sure they have all these other pieces first. Okay, so with that, we have 3 minutes till we're finished. Do we have any questions, concerns, whatever? Starting on Thursday, what I'd like to do is what I've taken is pieces from each level. And I've got given kind of a description of what happens at that level. And then talk about the receptive piece of that. And then I've sprinkled some intervention strategies with each one, knowing that with that, we're going to possibly use some of the same strategies we use with all level kids. We're going to continue doing that, but I'm just giving you sprinklings of samples of about a bazillion different strategies that we've put together. So any questions or whatever for today? I gave you kind of the framework today, and then on Thursday, we're going to get into the levels.
I have a question.
Okay.
I am a little familiar with the communication matrix, but this is a lot more information and I'm glad to have it. When you are asking other members of the team, including like teachers, paraprofessionals, and family to help in completing the communication matrix, do you give training, or like how is it more self-explanatory, or do you give them a little bit of guidance before you ask them to do it?
It's pretty self-explanatory because what it's doing is asking different questions. I mean, it asks questions and the nuances are just slight, and everyone kind of has a conversation around that. When you see this, when he does he do so-and-so? Yes, no. Oh, he does. All right. How do you know that? Does he use his head? Does he use his body? Does he use different? And it takes you through it. So the team kind of has a discussion and they come up with the answers to that. And then if you're using the online version, it generates that beautiful profile I showed you. So that's how I would do it. If you did the paper copy, there are 3 different ways. There's a professional copy that was the original. And then there was a family copy, which asked the same exact questions. It just looks a little more user-friendly. And the third and final way that they did it is through electronically. And that's still free on the Matrix. The Matrix is the communication matrix is available online, and it's through a foundation. And I think that they will let you have so many free copies. But then if you do more than that, you would have to pay a slight fee for it. But
per year.
Yeah. But I mean, it's really that's mostly to keep the website up and running is why they charge, because they no longer have grant monies in order to do that. But it kind of guides you through, and you guys talk about how they use, if they use that behavior, and how it's used.
Okay, thank you. So you would sit down as a team and all do it together?
Yes, I would. Yes.
It's hard now just because of quarantine and COVID, like it's hard to all be together in the same space.
That's true. And even if you can get, what I would do, even if you can't get the whole team together, then I would get those people who are most familiar with the individual. So that's usually probably the parent. And then maybe if there's a paraprofessional that works really closely with the individual, or maybe it's some member of the team that knows the person really well. That's who I would go with, those folks that know them the best.
That's good. And then that's easier to set up like a Zoom or something because it's not so many people.
Sure.
All right, great. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Nancy, can you see the chat box now? There was like 1 or 2, or do you want me to read them out?
I can't unless I stop sharing my screen.
All right.
And I can do that. Maybe.
Oh.
Okay. What else? I had more. Okay. Where are my questions? All right, somebody.
There's one from Akira about addressing discrepancies between environments.
I would think about the environments. Yeah, there possibly could be discrepancy within environments. That usually has to do with who knows the child better, you know? Sometimes people who don't know the child very well will try to do the matrix, and when they do, they're not going to get very good results because they don't know the child. They don't know those behaviors, or they haven't thought of those behaviors as communication. They're thinking as them more as their behaviors, and we need to get rid of them. So when I think about those discrepancies, I would think in terms of where do they spend the most time and who's around them, and so that you get a truer picture. And I don't know that you stick totally to, oh, he's a level 3 straight up. Most of these kids are splintered, so splintered, but I would start looking at where am I going to get the most bang for my buck? Where is this kid? How can we start and see the most success? That's where I would go.
I have a follow-up question on my question that you just answered. Thank you so much for the information. And I do have a question. So I'm a parent.
Okay.
And my child is an augmentative communicator who also has CVI.
All right.
So my child was very early on, when she was about 6 months old, we had introduced POD for her, and that was her main communication system, which she picked up very early on. And at that time, our speech therapist used to, because my daughter was growing so fast on the, you can see the language spectrum, like she was like every 4 or 5 months, she was moving to a new POD level.
Yeah.
Every 4 or 5 months, our therapist and us, the family, the parents, we would sit and we would do this communication matrix. And we would see how do we feel as parents, communication partners? Do we understand our child better? How has this child grown? And then we would compare. And we would also do this in one of the most familiar social settings of the child, like a play group or,
Right.
you know, favorite ice cream shop where, you know, people were more receptive to her, kind of thing. Now but eventually my daughter